All right, we're back here to continue with the plant chapters. A lot of stuff to cover on plants. Up to this point, again, you should be familiar with the taxonomy. We're sort of within the realm of the flowering plants, phylum Anthophyta. Uh, when we get to desert adapted plants, a lot of them are anthophytans, but they just have very different modifications for surviving very harsh climates. So let's get into the discussion here. So if you are going to be a desert adapted plant, you have to have certain modifications that allow you to survive in very limited water environments. So most desert plants, by definition, a desert is going to be very lacking in water. We associate heat with desert, but deserts can also be cold, especially in winter. So if you're a desert adapted plant, you are a hardy plant. You can survive with very limited water supply, and you can endure very, very big ranges in temperature, cold in the winter and quite warm in the summer. So these are some of the primary modifications or adaptations. Let's start with, I'm going to go out of sequence here. Let's start with the roots. So if you are a desert plant, your root system will be different than a tropical species. Different strategies for root growth, right? Some of the plants will send a very deep taproot that goes very, very deep into the soil. That's not necessarily a strategy for most desert plants. Most desert plants, instead of sending a deep taproot, send very fibrous roots, sort of very shallow, but very sort of spread around the plant. So when it rains in the desert, we have kind of a few different types of rains. One is that very, very light sprinkle, just enough to dirty up the windshield of most vehicles. Gets all stormy and dusty and lightning, but very, very little rain, right? So very little rain is still usable by these desert plants and these modified roots. They have a very high affinity for water, very close to the surface, if not even on the surface of the ground. So very minimal rainfall, they can still utilize that water. If we look at another type of storm, we have this flash flooding, very drastic storm, a lot of rain in a very short amount of time. So much rain that it doesn't have time to soak sometimes. It just starts to flood off, and that's what we call these flash floods. So these desert plants can still utilize that rainfall as well. And then in rare occasions, we do get that very nice rain throughout the day and very soaking, saturating type of rain. And again, excellent for desert plants. So they're able to acquire water in different kinds of ways, different types of rainfall events. And again, once they capture the water with these specialized roots, they have to be able to store the water. A lot of the cactus look like accordions, and they can actually swell. Their vacuoles in each cell increase, and the whole plant itself can expand to hold water. Waxy coating on the surface of the cactus pads helps to make that non-polar barrier, and water does not kind of leave across that barrier, so trapping moisture inside. I'm not going to get real involved with CAM photosynthesis. Some people call it cactus photosynthesis, crassulation, acid metabolism. It's a specific type of photosynthesis that separates what we call the light reactions and the dark reactions. There's a temporal separation. The cactus is soaking up, or the desert plant is soaking up light all day, but it doesn't complete photosynthesis until night. So it doesn't complete all the photosynthetic reactions in the light. It completes them in the day, which is unique for most plants. Most plants do the light reactions and what we call the dark reactions in the daytime. Plants separate that. So they open up the little pores, the stomata, at night when it's a little bit cooler, maybe a tiny bit more humidity in the air, to minimize water loss. So it's a specialized, the moral of the story, it's a specialized way of photosynthesizing unique to desert plants. The leaves themselves can be modified. If the desert plant has leaves, the leaves are going to be very tiny, right, to minimize evaporative loss. A lot of times the leaves are not going to be sort of spread out, catching sunlight like that. the leaves are going to be hanging downwards. So if the leaves hang downwards, when the sun is at its hottest at the top, sort of midday, noonday heat, a lot of that solar radiation will pass and not be absorbed by the leaf. So minimizing heat, minimizing transpiration, water loss. When the sun is and the sunrise, low in the horizon, or sunset, again low in the horizon, that's when these desert plants will get the maximum amount of leaf exposure. And if they have leaves, a lot of desert plants will not have leaves. They will utilize basically spines as protective structures. So the leaves are basically dead tissue, sharp tissue. Chloroplasts have been extracted from these leaves, and they're not for photosynthesis. They are for protection, right? So protecting the vital water that's trapped inside of that cactus. In other situations, like if we notice the cactuses here, or cacti, they actually appear green. So they can actually have chloroplasts within the stems and not even on the leaves. So again, a lot of modifications that we see in these desert adapted plants. So again, this is not the Chihuahuan Desert. This is not near El Paso. This is out west. We see the large Saguaro Cactus. These are representatives of the Sonoran Desert. Right? So different desert, but similar modifications to our cactus here in the Chihuahuan Desert. Very spiky, thorny cactuses trying to protect that vital water that they have inside. Just to kind of give you a little bit of insight on local plants, local to the El Paso area, a very common species is the prickly pear cactus, or puntia. There's a couple of different species of a puntia here. In Spanish, the nopal, very common food source. We can eat the cactus pads. Maybe you can consume the tunas, the actual prickly pears. But again, very, very common, well-known desert plant, the prickly pear cactus. Another maybe common plant, maybe you don't really look at it or look for it that often or see it that often, but it's a very well-adapted desert plant called the Ocotillo in Spanish. Forcaria splendens, scientific name, I don't know the English common name, devil's walking stick or something like that. It's basically a stick with spines. And for most of the year, it will look like this with no leaflets. This time of year when we're getting some rainstorms, we start to see little deciduous leaves. These little leaves grow for a little while, they photosynthesize while there's still moisture, and then they will drop off. So we can photosynthesize directly through the stem, or these little non-permanent leaves that we see on the Ocotillo, on the stem itself. Very high up, you see these clusters of red flowers, and you should remember what type of organism is trying to, or the plant is trying to attract with red flowers. Right? So up high, 12, 15 feet up in the air, sometimes we see these red flowers there. So Ocotillo. Common in deserts as well, we have the yucca or yucca species. Agaves, kind of similar, but key differences. For you tequila lovers, this is where we get the tequila from the agave plants. You see these sort of stalks with the flowers elevated up to attract pollinators. And once the fruit is produced, it's going to be a higher area for seed dispersal. So a pretty neat strategy that they use. Again, white for non-specific type of pollinator attraction. And then we have yellow primarily for bees, but other species can also pollinate these species as well. Kind of different type of plant, different strategy, not necessarily specific to the deserts. We can find it in other habitats as well, but this is what we call the mesquite, the honey mesquite, Prosopis glandulosa, very abundant in the El Paso area. And in El Paso, it doesn't look like a tree. It looks like a low-growing shrub. If you live in El Paso, you drive Loop 375 on the sort of east side of the city through Fort Bliss. every little sand mound is covered in some sort of green plant. That's that mesquite. If you remember being on campus, Valverde campus, we have these large trees there. Um, Same species, mesquite, but again, a lot more water. If you live in San Antonio, you live in Central Texas, there's a lot of mesquite there, but it's a tree form. Here in the deserts, it's a shrub form. Very well protected, large spines, very small leaflets, modified leaflets, and then these beans that are the fruits of fertilized mesquite ovaries there. Can be used for cooking. A lot of barbecue is flavored with mesquite wood, right? Mesquite flavored barbecue. It's again a economically useful type of plant. Now, we're looking at the idea of having thorns and spines for protection. And most desert plants will have thorns and spines. It doesn't waste a lot of water, right? But thorns and spines are very good against large herbivores, deer, cows, rabbits, goats, that kind of thing. But what if your enemy is not a large mammal, a large plant-eating mammal? What if it's small insects, right? Small insects will be able to navigate their way through the large spines. So spines are not necessarily effective against insects. So we have another desert plant that some of you may be familiar with. We call this the creosote bush. Creosote bush is a very well-adapted desert species, but it does not utilize thorns or spines. What it does, it basically will secrete like a little resin, a little oil, a creosote oil, right? And if you're from the desert region, you know what this means, right? When somebody says, it smells like rain. Wow, yeah, it does smell like rain, right? If you're not from a desert region, you may not know that distinctive smell of the desert when it rains. But if you are from a desert where there's creosote bush, or in Spanish we call it gobernadora, it's a very common shrub around, gets small, can get up, I don't know, 8-10 feet tall sometimes. But that resin that it produces is in the leaves. When the leaves fall, that resin can persist in the soil. It's sort of designed as an anti-predatory, anti-parasitic type of chemical. Makes it very difficult for other animals to eat and digest this oil. So when that oil comes into contact with moisture, it secretes then that, it gives off that rain, quote unquote, rain smell. And this is the rain plant or the creosote bush, the gobernadora. Very common. Again, I'd be shocked if you hadn't seen this in El Paso. You may not have known what it was, but it's very abundant in pretty much the sandy parts, the mountainy parts. It's very abundant throughout the city here. So that's what it looks like. Very minimal leaves, tiny leaves to reduce water loss, yellow flowers, and these little white fuzzy seeds that utilize the wind to help them tumble along the ground there. And so plants, desert plants of the Chihuahuan desert here. And there's other species as well. I'm just trying to highlight a few important ones, right? But we start to, we continue with the idea of chemicals, toxic chemicals within the leaves. Well, we have a non-native, an introduced species. We call this oleander, or laurel in Spanish. Comes in different colors, white, pink, fuchsia, real pretty bright flowers, and very common, very hardy. It does very well in the desert. Native to the Mediterranean area in Europe, but I guess when the Spaniards came across, they wanted to feel like home. They brought plants with them or seeds, and these plants really did well once they were introduced into North America, to especially the El Paso area. So these plants, you notice, don't really look like desert plants, but they have this other strategy. They don't produce thorns. They produce these harsh alkaloids that are quite toxic, dangerous. You don't want to be eating these. So just be aware, if you have these as ornamental plants around your home, be careful that pets don't eat them, that kids don't put these in the mouth. I would suspect they would have a very nasty taste, very bitter. but if it was ingested, it could cause some sort of health issue there, right? So oleanders. And with that, that concludes our desert plant discussion. I'm going to continue on looking at this idea of biochemicals and how plants utilize biochemicals for their benefit, right? And I'm going to pause this one here, and I'll continue with that next discussion right away.